All right, welcome everyone. My name is Daniel Chacon. Today's session, if you're hopefully you're in the right room, is going to be on supervising and being in charge of wise, quote unquote, volunteers. Hopefully you all had a chance to kind of look over what we'll be discussing today. I'm a firm believer that online learning isn't really done through most of the time PowerPoints, and that you got to keep it a little active and a little live. So I actually didn't put together a PowerPoint today, especially because what I want today to be about is really focusing on what your questions are, because you probably came into the session for a reason. So my guess is you have some difficulties with some volunteers and you're trying to figure out the answers to solve those problems. So what I will be doing is just sharing with you some of my past experience, give you a little update of who I am if you weren't a part of our session yesterday, and an introduction. And then we'll just go into actually sharing. I believe that these types of meetings are more about that they're facilitated by someone who can move the conversation forward, but also that it's peer-led. So everyone in this room is a subject matter expert. So you all have valid things to say. I am going to tell you right now, I am going to give you tons of things to be putting in the chat. So if you are working, and you have other things that you're trying to do, feed the dog, take care of the kids, drive to your next appointment, I totally understand that. This is the world that we live in right now. And if we were all together back in Texas, we would be able to give 120% to the conference. But because we're back home in our own places, it's a little hard to do that. So I totally understand. So if you can get on camera, great. If you need to be off camera for right now, that's okay too. If you're not able to even do the chat, that's all right too. But as much as you can, I really encourage you to try to utilize the chat and to try to turn on your camera if possible, and if safe so that we can all have a conversation and really begin this journey together as we learn from one another. As I mentioned, my name is Daniel Chacon. I work for an organization called the Elisa Ann Roosh Burn Foundation. It is a statewide nonprofit based in California that focuses on working with burn survivors. When Dave offered me the opportunity to be a part of this conference, I absolutely said yes. For me, the symbiotic and parallel relationship from what you guys are doing in your arena is so similar to what we do with working with burn survivors that I knew that I was coming to an environment with like-minded people. Also knowing that I probably, out of Dave and Sam, probably can connect to you guys in the realm that most of the camps that I am a part of and connected to on a statewide or national or international level are majority volunteer run. They're not paid staff. In fact, most of them are completely 100% volunteer run. So this is a very pertinent topic that I have personally faced, that I've gone through, as well as been able to see happen through other conversations and examples with other people. So with that being said, I'll give you a boring, brief overview of who I am, but then I want to know who you guys are, because today is about a conversation and a dialogue. So outside of my work at Burn Foundation and being a part of the burn community and working with burn survivors through recreation, we do a summer camp, a teenage camp, an adult camp, a family weekend. We believe very heavily in recreational programming. So we do both programs for adults and for children. So we work with the whole gamut of people. And our focus is really utilizing recreation as a means for what we define as peer support. We know that there's a lot of therapeutic healing that happens when you bring people who are very similar backgrounds together and they're able to have organic conversations, and hopefully some intervention and some psychosocial components that you may be doing within your own camp programming. In addition to that, we do ski trips, surf trips, kayaking, outdoor rock climbing. We sleep in an aquarium at the LA Zoo. We do all kinds of things, really, for the purpose of really working and building a community and building a structure and support around those who've been impacted by a burn injury. So all that being said, in addition to that, I also have the privilege of being in charge of the International Association of Burn Camps, which is a large organization similar to what you guys are doing here, in which we work with many different burn camps. So I've heard many different stories of other camps in a medical specialty talk about some of the topics that we'll be talking about today. So with that being said, I want to hear from you. So utilizing our chat, like I mentioned before, what I want to know is, the first question is who you are, where you're coming from. So if you just want to flood in, all those things. Let me know what your name is and where you're coming from, what state you're going to be a part of. I'm curious to see how many of you are from the same areas or how many of you guys might even know each other. This is just a warm-up introduction. So go ahead and start using that chat function, and then let's start seeing where we're coming from. Oh, we have someone outside Alberta, Canada. Been there before, Ben? Great place. Delaware, Arizona, Buffalo, New York, Idaho, more New York, North Carolina, Michigan, Charleston, Houston, Vermont, Michigan. I don't see any of my California people. They saw me here. Oh, Las Vegas. Very familiar with the Las Vegas area. Awesome. Second question I want to ask you, if you haven't already filled out this of who you are and where you're coming from, I want to know from you, what is it that you do at your camp? What is your role, right? So let me know what your role is. And this matters because it's definitely going to play into the conversation that we have when it comes to volunteers, right? So are you the camp director? I'm seeing a lot of program directors, a lot of camp directors, program managers, volunteer manager. Ooh, Spencer, we're going to be tapping into you later. We want to hear your expertise. Executive director, co-director of camp, director, assistant director. Beautiful. I'm seeing a lot of similarities. And Jennifer, thank you for that comment of being paid, because that's my next question for everyone right now. Are you a paid position or are you also a volunteer position? Because if you're a volunteer managing other volunteers, that changes things. See, Rosemary's volunteer, lots of paid people, paid positions. Lynn's also volunteer. We're gonna tap into you volunteer people, because I think what you may be going with in terms of dealing with a wise volunteer may be a little different than what a paid employee may be experiencing as well. Perfect. Thank you guys for being so active in the chat. Thank you for everyone who's also coming a little late to the session. I'm not going to shame you, I promise. I appreciate everyone being here today. I know that we all have busy lives and that there's a lot going on. And as I mentioned before, if you can jump on camera, great. Love to see smiling faces. I hate talking to a screen. It's been a long time that we've been doing this, but hopefully soon this will be a thing of the past. But there's a lot of benefits of this also. Getting to meet everyone right now in the comfort of our own home is a great benefit. So I'm grateful for this opportunity. So when we think about a wise volunteer, I think obviously we're being a little facetious if we're going to put something as a positive and put quotations around it, right? I think what we're really talking about is dealing with volunteer and volunteer management and really trying to find the stride that's going to be a perfect balance of what it means to work with someone who is not paid for the service that they're given, right? It's this tricky thing. And I think for those of you who are paid, I'm not sure if you also have paid staff that are underneath you, but working with a volunteer versus working with someone that you're paying are two different kind of power dynamics, right? And I think we think of them separately. We think of them as two distinct situations in which, as a volunteer, I can't hold them accountable like I would do for a paid staff. And I want to start off by saying that's not correct, right? And it's saying that notion, if that's your notion, is that a volunteer should be treated differently than a staff person, not so true. And I think what we get ourselves in trouble with sometimes is thinking that because someone is volunteering, that maybe the issue is the fact that you're gonna have to find someone else to do the work. And if they're not there, then it's more work on you, right? I think for a lot of us, going in working with volunteers, especially those who have been around maybe before you even came around, can be a very difficult thing, because in these settings, a lot of it has to do with almost of a power dynamic and of what you've been inheriting as a paid person. So I'm going to ask at this time, I love discussion and dialogue. My big thing was that we were not going to be, I was not going to be talking to you. That's the reason why I decided not to do a PowerPoint. I'm going to give you some examples, and then I want to hear from you guys what you guys are experiencing when we have this term of wise volunteers, which really, again, we're really just referring to as maybe some issues in addressing some issues with volunteers. So feel free to unmute yourselves. When we talk about this dynamic of power and accountability and the difference of what we see between a volunteer versus a staff, I'm curious to know from you guys, in your experience, What is it that you're seeing that really makes the difference between someone who is paid and someone who is volunteering for you in an organization? And if you don't want to be unmuted and you just want to answer in the chat, I love using the chat function. So participate in the chat also if you're one of those people.
I can say something.
Go for it, Ben. And then
Yeah.
Deb, you're next.
I don't know if I'm the only one in here or not, but we actually have a combination of paid staff and volunteers. So one of the biggest things that we struggle with is that we have staff who go through a week-long training and they're here for the full summer, but every week our volunteers rotate and they really only get about 2-ish days worth of training prior to the summer. So there is like a odd dynamic between them because the volunteers could be brand new, they could have been coming for ages, but at the end of the day, they have not gone through the rigorous amount of training that our summer staff have as well. So there's obviously a dynamic between the two of them. And I don't know the same, if it's the same in the US or not, but in Alberta specifically, volunteers don't actually count towards the adult ratio. So that's also where it's when you're talking about the have to be treated like they don't need to be treated different or they're not as important. In that scenario, that is actually a fact versus you can't leave a volunteer alone with a group of kids without a staff member being there.
Beautiful. Appreciate that insight. Deb, tell us what you're thinking.
So we're all volunteer. So we don't have any paid staff. And I don't really feel a difference in the power dynamic, but as one of the co-founders of camp, and we have some of our staff that have been there since the beginning. I don't know if entitled is the right word, but there's some staff, since they've been there since the beginning, may feel maybe a little bit more challenging than some of our staff that turns over every few years.
We have the same thing at Case Camp. I'm also one of the co-founders of camp, and we've got lead counselors that have been lead counselors since year one. And the idea of moving them down to just a counselor, not that that's a demotion of any sort, but giving them less power is unthinkable. Like they deserve that role. So that's really hard, especially with them being volunteers when they say, but I've been here from the start, like I deserve this. It's not a neg. I'm not punishing you. It's just trying to like move around and get new blood in and energy and stuff. But that's definitely an entitlement thing that we deal with too.
I'm seeing that word entitlement kind of also be a trend, and some head nods and some things in the chat with that too. This is where I do think it is this power shift, whether you want to call it power or if you want to call it this ownership. I think for me, in my experience, and I'm not sure about your community, but I would say coming from a medical specialty camp, I was 24 years old when I came to my community. I was brand new out of college, had been working in camps and in a social work background, worked as a firefighter for 4 years, very young, but had experienced a good amount of things and felt like I had something to contribute and some fresh ideas. Also, it's a nonprofit, so they're going to pay a 24-year-old dirt cheap ways to do this job, and most other people working professions aren't going to do it. The problem I came into, though, I was 24, and as I came in for 24, at the time, our camp had just celebrated their 26th anniversary. And there had been people at our camp who had been there for all 26 years, and they were volunteers because we are, and this is an interesting term that I've loved insight from people, we are a volunteer run staff supported organization, right? And I'm not sure if you've ever used that term. The opposite would be a volunteer supported staff facilitated organization, right? So volunteers are supporting us versus as a staff, I'm supporting my volunteers. And I'll go through that breakdown a little later. But at that time, I was coming to work with people who were more than double my age. I was coming to work in an organization where the camp had been going on longer than I had even been alive. And most of the people there had been doing it. And in the fire service, and I'm not sure where you get your volunteers and who they are, but in the fire service, which is a big bulk of our volunteers, most of them are used to doing what they've always done in the past. So if it's not broke, why fix it, right? And I'm not sure if that's a phrase in your guys' camp, but that is where, oh, this is what we do. So anytime there's a change in the schedule, anytime there's change in training, anytime there's a change in the meal, that's not what we do. That's, well, why are we doing this, right? Almost to a degree where we've got so much into a routine and a rut that we've forgotten that camp is messy, right? My phrase when I'm at camp and there's something that goes wrong, that's camp. We're used to adjusting. All right, let's pivot. The pool just got broke. All right, we're going to go turn on the sprinklers and we're going to play capture the flag, right? You always are having to adjust, but there's certain times in working with people who have been in that environment that we go through it in terms of an autopilot, right? I'm in, I set up my decorations in my cabin, I'm here for the kids, I check out. Like that is, it's in and out. Like I don't even have to think about it. It's so mainstream, packing for camp, everything is the same thing I've done year after year after year. So in that, maybe entitlement is the word for some of us. Maybe the word for us is also of getting so fixated on what we know that it's impossible or hard for us to think about what could be then. Anyone have thoughts on that or experiences and similar experiences in what their camp structure is right now?
Daniel.
Go ahead, Lynn.
So yes, I can relate to everything that everybody is saying. The other dynamic that I see quite a bit, probably I'm the staff director for my camp, all volunteers, all of us. Probably a third of my staff are former campers, thus they're survivors, right? Which is a wonderful testimony for our campers and for all of us to see. I came into the camp about 10 years ago. Many of these people have been around, as you said, for 20, 25 years. And I am not a cancer survivor. I have been a full-time caregiver, but I am not a cancer survivor. And there is often the survivors versus non-survivors kind of attitude as well. So when I bring in new volunteers who are not survivors, but who I believe will be great counselors or other staff, fill other staff roles, those who have been campers often tend to look at them or us very differently, as if to say, well, it's great that you're here, but you probably don't really get this the same way we do. And I acknowledge that to a certain extent that's true. But that's another dynamic. I don't know if anybody else experiences that, but that's another dynamic that I see when I'm trying to develop a team environment with my staff.
I appreciate that comment, and I think let's address the barriers also when it comes to what these relationships and power dynamics or the struggles are. Was there someone else who was going to say something right now?
I was just going to say, we have a similar scenario, but it's not so much with cancer survivors because we're still so young. Not enough of our campers have gotten old enough to come back and work as staff. But when you have the staff that's been there for 13 years and then you bring in a new staff member, we tend to see a lot of clickiness going on. Oh, you're new. Oh, you're a new one. You're not one of us yet. Which you try to, team building, ice breaking, do your best to incorporate and explain everyone we're one family here, but that's definitely something that we see is a lot of cliques between the veterans and the newbies.
Awesome. Anyone else want to talk about some of these struggles that we're seeing within our WISE volunteers?
We're actually looking forward to when we get to go back to real camping. We've done virtual for 2 years, and our camp has been in existence. I think we're at 38 years. And to be truthful, I've been part of it for 37. And many people in our group we have many 25 plus. And the problem, as we say, is the ones that seem to know everything, again, feel entitled to be the head counselors. They feel entitled to not lord it over the newbies, but they don't embrace them as easily, which you'd like to see them bring them into the family. It is a situation where we're actually kind of hopeful that some of our incredible retention fails after 2 years of being virtual, and we're able to balance our camp. I mean, right now, we take 110 counselors for our week of camp, and probably newbies, maybe 12. That's the kind of retention. They keep coming back. And it's wonderful because they know the routines, but it's not, because it's hard to get in new ideas and new fresh blood with just, youthful enthusiasm. So we're kind of hoping that maybe we'll get to a 60-40 split when we get to go back to real camping, just kind of fresh air. We will see.
Great. Appreciate that, Jane. Anyone else want to comment? I've heard some themes and I want to move us to a new direction, but I don't want to, this is our opportunity. This is what I want this session to be about, is you really throwing out what is the issue when we're talking about wise volunteers.
Yeah, Daniel, I don't know if this is quite the direction that you're going in as well, but I'd like to address also, I find that because recruitment and retention is such an issue, and we have the same long-time volunteers that have certainly been with the program longer than I have, that we're so afraid of losing them that we give them too much boundaries. I mentioned in the chat, okay, the deadline for your application is in February, and it's just presumed that they can apply all the way up to July. Whereas I'm trying to do my job and run a background check and do references and interviews, and I need you to turn in that deadline at the deadline. And it's so just built into the culture that we're going to let them do whatever they want because we so badly need them to come back. So I'd really like some tools for addressing how we can have a little bit more structure, but still be able to retain those volunteers. I do value them, but I do need them to act like the rules do apply to them as well, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I don't know if you can see if you're on gallery view or speaker view, but if you can see the gallery view, I see tons of people shaking their head with you. So we'll make time for that. That was one of the themes I was hearing in it. And if you have others, please put them in the chat. I just want to sum up what I'm hearing in terms of this concept, because what you're all describing isn't a new phenomenon. All right. This isn't before COVID or during COVID that these things just suddenly appeared. This isn't a situation that we have when we're dealing with individuals and people. Number one, actual liability at camp usually isn't water, or isn't going to be the activities that you do. The liability actually is the people that you bring on and that you're bringing. That's your biggest liability, is choosing and being able to manage individuals. Because at the end of the day, we all have a degree of an ego. We all have a degree of a desire, especially when you come from a camp environment like you guys, and in my arena of working with burn survivors. End of the day, this isn't a job. Most of these positions and most of these people coming are volunteers, and they're coming with the right intention, right? I tell my staff all the time, we're going to assume positive intent. Positive intent goes so far in working with other people. For us in California, we had people who for many years were just used to the same thing, right? And like I mentioned, fire service, we do not change something's broken. That's what we do. This is what we do. New ideas were a hard thing to do. I'll give you an example. How many of you guys, and some of you are pretty young, so you may not know this, but some of you who might be a little more seasoned might know this term. But Disneyland back in the day had something called an e-ticket, right? And that was it was the best of the best. That was the best you can get is an e-ticket. You wanted an e-ticket when you went to Disneyland. And sometimes we would take that phrase, and we believe a lot within appropriate touch, but we do hugs at camp, and we call them e-hugs because it's the best hug you can give, right? So a b-hug is a little pat on the back or a little wimpy, limp arm, but an e-hug is just a nice embrace that you give a kid. Well, Disneyland has not used that phrase e-tickets. Most of our counselors don't even know what that reference even talks about, but we still use it today because it's so ingrained within the culture, right? So there's an element that you are doing and addressing some of these issues and some of these themes that I'll bring up right now in two different ways. And if you are a new person, a new director, a new volunteer manager, whatever your position is, and you're brand new to the organization or to the camp environment, I'm going to be honest right now and saying you have an uphill battle, right? Because you are coming into a situation where culture has already been established. And for you now to want to change the culture is not going to happen overnight. So one, I'm going to tell you, give yourself some grace. Two, I'm going to say, you got to find some allies. Three, it's going to come over time, and culture is not something that immediately shifts, right? It's something that can be changed, but it is something that takes intentionality and it takes consistency. The other schools, if you have been a part of your camp community and you're dealing with some of these things and you're seeing these things happen and some of these trends, your issue is part culture, right? But part could also be more of that power dynamic of like, oh, you know me though, we know each other. They may not see you as the leader figure per se, or they might, but in some degree, they think they can get away with whatever they want to get away with, or they think they have enough of connection with you that they maybe don't have to adhere to all the other things like the deadlines, or maybe showing up early, like when you need them to. And there are probably going to be the people who are going to be like, no, I don't want to do that. That's okay. I'm going to pick and choose what I want to do in my role as a volunteer because I have that opportunity. So if it doesn't fit into that, I'm not going to be a part of that. So some of the things I've heard through the chat and through some of you speaking have been some common themes. And one of the themes is accountability. All right, so we're struggling with wise volunteers of keeping them accountable to what the new rules are, or accountable to what the rules were before, but they're no longer following. The second theme I hear is difficulty with change, difficulty with any type of change that is going on in the organization, or difficulty maybe following a new direction that may be the direction you are wanting to see within the camp culture or in the camp policies. The other theme I'm hearing is barriers of integration and becoming that one community that you want to be. Some of these barriers might be the survivor/non-survivor type of relationship, age of your volunteers that you're working with, if there's a diverse group of people, new volunteers versus old volunteers, if your volunteers are trying to integrate with also staff and what that relationship and power dynamic looks like. So barriers is definitely something that comes into play when now we're having issues within our volunteers. Hopefully that sums up a lot of what you guys are saying. It seems like this, what you all had brought up are topics when it comes to problems that we're seeing within camps, and hopefully covers all of them. So if there's something I missed, again, feel free to put that in the chat, because I'm definitely wanting to see if there's something I'm missing within that. So I want to take these one by one and address them separately, right? I want to address them in the sense of if you're brand new coming into a culture, what you could be doing to working with wise volunteers, or if you've been in your role for a while, maybe you're one of the founders, maybe you've been there since the beginning of the camp, what your dynamic might be. And then I want to hear from you guys. I'm not an expert. Like I mentioned today, I do a lot of support group facilitation in my organization. I do a lot of facilitation in general. What I say is that all of our support groups are peer-led, professionally facilitated, meaning that all of you, again, are subject matter experts. So I want to hear what you guys have to say, because your lived experience, especially in the arena of what you guys do in your specialty, is going to be different. Maybe there'll be a lot of similars in what I do in Burns, but it's going to be different. So I want to hear what your viewpoint is, because that's how we all truly learn together. All right, going into that, let's address this term of entitlement. All right. So entitlement, or this ability that I deserve this. I've been here, I put in my time, or why do I have to do this? Like that's not me. Like I'm not going to follow that. Personally speaking, when I first came into my organization, there was a degree in which it was just so routine that you went to camp. And if you didn't go to camp, all of your friends from camp started to say, hey, how come you're not at camp? It's expected almost. And in their mind, they expected themselves. So one of the big things when I see people who are saying that their issue with their volunteer is entitlement, usually has to deal with a burnout. They are ready to be done with camp and haven't been able to come to that conclusion themselves because they have such a fondness to the organization and to the camp that it's hard to let go, right? And this has nothing to do with age. Burnout can happen at any phase of someone's life. What I think we don't communicate to our volunteers within the culture is that, yes, we love and value and we want to see you, but sometimes life throws a wrench at us. And if your cup is not full and you come to our camp ready to give and to give to these children or adults or whomever you're serving, when your cup is not full, chances are whatever you're dealing with at home or whatever burnout you have is going to come into play in the dynamics of camp, right? So usually it is that air of burnout that we're seeing someone with entitlement. The other thing I see when people are airing out these issues regarding or feeling entitled usually has to deal with, and someone had mentioned it too, being at camp for so long and thinking that like, that is yours. That is yours. And I see this a lot with our burn survivors that we've graduated into being counselors, is that there's so much ownership and so much love that they have for camp, that they think that like that it belongs to them, right? It is still for them. That issue of I own this is mine, is an issue that's going to really bring forth the decision making of being like, I don't need to do this, or I should still have this because I deserve this because I own this, right? That passion is beautiful. And that passion can also be redirected in other ways, right? So in that situation, how do we break down this possessive nature of I own this, or this is mine, this is my experience, and holding so tight to something and allowing it to say, camp doesn't belong to anyone. If any of you attended the debrief session yesterday, I said, the biggest issue that we can have in any position you are, a camp director or exec director, is to think that camp is dependent on you. If your camp is dependent on you or anyone in your organization, your camp is set up to fail, because camp should go on regardless of any person who's in there, because camp is a culture, camp is a philosophy, and your policy, personnel, cultural things that you put into place and work so hard to build up should be able to sustain the camp program moving forward. Those are my thoughts when it comes down to it. Obviously, I believe in solution-based. So how do you fix that then, right? So how do you fix these two big areas then that we're starting to see? Before I go in that, I wanna bring some highlights to the chat just because I don't wanna talk to you guys. So Dennis, I'm gonna turn it to you, and then Spencer, I also wanna hear your chime in on these thoughts.
You just want me to read what I put in the chat, or what would you
or
like to
elaborate what you might be saying right now?
No, what I shared in the chat are just that we have some long-term volunteers who very much express for the first time really, that as an organization we were so focused on the kids and providing what we could to the kids that we were ignoring the volunteer needs, and that the volunteers felt they needed and deserved something more too than what camp was offering. We were focused on our mission. We were doing everything we could to provide an amazing virtual experience, but we weren't providing enough assurance that the volunteers were having a good experience as well. And these are volunteers that I would say are very, very endeared at camp, that are highly skilled. We're talking child psychologists, we're talking pediatric doctor, a teacher. There's a few others who are just very, very good at their work. And I need them there at the same time, you know what I mean? But they really got into a place of, well, you know, camp is just as much for me as it is for the kids, and I need to be served as well. And I had a hard time with that. I struggled a little bit with that, trying to meet them where they were, but also trying to redirect them to what our mission is, and create retention mechanisms for them at the same time.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that insight, and I can shake my head and say, if you ask any of my volunteers, they will say they come to camp one, to see their friends and to enjoy this experience with them, and also then to give back to the kids. The kids are number one. They're going to say number one is kids, but there's a philosophy out there as, and this is a very pessimistic philosophy. So depending on where your worldview is and how you view life, you may agree or disagree with this, but they say that as humans, we do nothing without selfish gain. Right. So what is my buy-in for this? Right. Volunteerism is not usually not also something that is excluded from that, and that many people volunteer is because it's the warm, gooey feelings that they get inside. It's the feelings that they feel about themselves, or the feelings that people maybe at home might be giving them. And I'm not going to say that's right or wrong. I'm going to say that that is something that is definitely needs to be addressed. I'm going to turn it now to Spencer. Spencer, I didn't read through everything you had written there. I'm not sure if you want to elaborate or just sum up what you talked about.
Yeah, sure. So anyone can agree or disagree with me. I'm coming off a stint at a summer camp in New York called Camp Chinchacook, and to be totally honest, this is what I'd call a traditional summer camp. Been around for 100 years, mostly serves the local community. So lots of these staff are teenagers from the Saratoga area, they're all young, they're 17 to 19, and a lot of them have a lot more privilege than a lot of people across the country, and they can really only work at this camp because they have outside means of income that allows them to take that big of a pay hit to be working for $14, $15 a day. So they're normally there for the full summer. But in my experience, normally someone would start to get wise around their third year of working there, and they generally feel more comfortable in terms of working there during the summer and sort of taking ownership of what they do. And we try and encourage that as much as possible. And the main experience we found opening up after COVID was honestly that a lot of these staff that missed a full summer or a summer and a half because of COVID are coming back and treating the experience as if they didn't miss that experience, where a lot of people which never really took a leadership position, maybe it was their first job, are now coming back and acting like they've been doing it for years and really trying to push their thoughts and experience onto other staff when maybe they're not totally ready to take these positions of leadership. And I feel another huge reason why this was happening is because I'm sure some of you will be experiencing this if this will be your first time opening up again, is definitely they were having trouble understanding that the experience wasn't totally for them because of how much you romanticize camp when you're not there. I'm sure we all have moments when we're at camp during the summer where we're about to go crazy and would like nothing else other to leave. But a lot of the time, the staff, the moment they leave camp, they forget about all the bad and just keep thinking about the good, keeping about the fun times they had with friends. They don't remember any of the hard campers or the campers that might have challenged them, and they're coming back into the summer after literal years of romanticizing this experience up for themselves and thinking everything's gonna go perfect. And when they might not be the head counselor coming back, and they might take offense to that because they're remembering how great a job they were, how great their campers were doing. And I found that obviously this is a lot more applicable to younger paid staff more so than volunteers, but really having a conversation on how to encourage them to keep learning, where a lot of the times in my experience, when you enter a camp environment, if you find something new to do or something to challenge yourself, you'll get a lot more buy-in. So maybe this counselor feels too comfortable in the cabin, and maybe redirecting their frustration to taking more leadership in a different dynamic where we might have a head counselor, but maybe for these 45 minutes a day, you can take charge of the art program for just one period so they can start to build up that experience they feel they're missing. And honestly, 1 or 2 times this past summer, I had to have an honest conversation with asking why somebody is at the camp. And if it was fully selfish, I'd ask them to sort of focus more on the campers. But sometimes a lot of these staff were getting burned out because they were so focused on the campers that they didn't take care of themselves. So basically to sum it up, sorry for that long ramble, but a lot of these staff, because they're missing literal years of experience, are not coming back fully understanding how to approach the job. So it can hurt them to the point where they're trying to do too much for these campers because they don't know how to take care of themselves. Or maybe they're not doing enough for the campers because they just romanticize that experience that they had the last time they were at camp and sort of forgot what the mission is.
I appreciate all of those comments, and thank you, Spencer. Thank you, Dennis, for elaborating on those. I want to be mindful of time, as we are, an hour is not enough to talk about this conversation, and I'm going to admit that right now. So this is beginning the conversation of like, really, what do we see this morphing into? And hopefully what I hope to be here is in this dialogue is that you see people who are part of this conversation and you're hearing it and you're saying, yes, I'm like that too, I feel that too, is that you can take these conversations and silo them offline. I want to focus the remainder of our time to really think about solution-driven things that may be applicable for you actually to take back home, right? So I definitely want to hear stories. I'm definitely open to hear individual perspectives, but I also want to say, like, as we move into this last part of our discussion, is that we're really looking at what we can do to change this. So whether the situation is going to be on entitlement, accountability, or difficulty with change, it's going to come down to a few things. One, it's going to come down to what is your policies, what is your structure for your camp, and how do you hold to what you as an organization set out to do in the beginning. And if you're unsure on what a policy is going to be, right? Or if there's not a policy that maybe says like, oh, how do you even capture that? How do you put in into your policy manual or job description, like have a good attitude or be willing to do everything other people are doing. When you are in this situation, it is going to require that certain people's feelings are going to get hurt. I'm going to tell you right now, if you're trying to change the culture or try to change and move towards a direction you believe is going to be beneficial, you may be losing people. And that is a hard thing for us to say, is losing or firing. I've seen the term firing often in the chat. Like I said before, the biggest failure that we make in this environment is thinking that staff who are paid and volunteers who are not are two separate things. And I want to go back to that and saying we must treat them the same. If a staff member in an organization decided to come late to a job, didn't do an assignment on a due date, you would write them up. There would be a course of action for that individual. Why does that change when we talk about volunteerism? Why do we think that they, because of how long they've been with the organization or because of who they are, their ties to it? This is a bigger can of worms that I'm not going to open up, but just to throw out there is the saying, sometimes some of my biggest volunteers and the ones that I have the most issues with are sometimes some of my biggest donors, or sometimes are even board members that work at our camp. So you really want to talk about power dynamics and dealing with these things. It really comes down to sometimes people really think that this camp is theirs. They have more ownership of that camp than anyone else there, or at least more than you, so that they don't want to prescribe to that. So as we talk about solution-driven pursuits in these categories and these different themes that we've mentioned, I really want to say that when we're targeting culture, it really has to come down to really realizing, and Spencer, you were the one who mentioned this, is what are your intentions? And I don't say that in the same way of like, is it a selfish intention or not? Is that all intentions are good intentions. I'm not mad at someone who has an intention of like, again, being from a fire camp and from a fire environment, very fire driven, I had a lot of female staff who came to our camp to find a husband. That was their goal of coming as a camp counselor, was to find a husband. And we had to see that. And I had to say, but are they a good counselor? That could be an intention, sure. But do they take care of the kids? Do they do what they're going to do? Totally. Are they a good counselor? Would I love them to come back? Absolutely, right? So it has to come down to, what are your intentions? What are you really having to do? So as you start to do your staff training, and as you start to set the parameter, we are mirrors of what we want to see. So if you are if you're the executive director or you're a staff member, I want you to mirror to your camp director, if you're also not wearing multiple hats, mirror to that person what you expect the culture to see. So we used to use this term of inverted triangle at our camp, right? So an inverted triangle is going to be shaped this way, heavier on the top, skinnier on the bottom, is to say our campers are number one, right? But the campers are supported. We elevated the campers to the highest level because underneath them is going to be maybe like our counselors in training or LITs or whatever you define those are, they're the next tier. They're still a camper, but they're kind of staff. So they're the next tier, the second highest level. The third level might be your camp counselors, then your lead counselor, or your someone of a leadership in a cabin maybe. And then depending on what your structure is, maybe your leadership or your unit leaders or whatever you define those terms to be. And then maybe your camp director. And then maybe if you have an organization, they're at the very bottom. There's a really cool story that talks about, I'm not sure if you guys know the Nemo story, but it's about a fish and like dad yells at mom yells at the older brother yells at the sister yells at the dog then scares the cat, the cat then scares the fish that's in the fishbowl. It is a cycle that we go through. So when we are mirroring something and we're wanting to see something change, there has to be consistency from the top to the bottom. We have to hold people accountable back to what we envision within our policy manuals and within themes. So it may sound silly, but sometimes it even has to go to, is there a job description of what our camp counselors are going to be like? Yes, great. Are you evaluating them then after the camp is over? And in your evaluations, are you having questions that are addressing the concerns that you are seeing? If your issue is works well with other co-counselors, you should be able to evaluate them, right? And evaluations also come in different forms, right? So really, at the end of the day, going back to the idea that your staff and your volunteers, paid or non-paid, are the same. You hold accountable based off of documentation based off what you're telling people to do. So if you don't already have some of this legwork within a policy manual, a volunteer manual, job descriptions, there's a lot of work to be done. But I will say the good news is there's a lot of camps who already have that out there. And part of being a part of this community is being able to share. So if no one has those types of documentations, I 100% will say, work in a different arena, I will give you our volunteer camp manual. That's going to give them all the expectations in there. They sign that manual every year saying that they're going to abide to it. If they were to break any of those things within our volunteer manual that they sign on a yearly basis, that is automatically a reason for us to say, we have to let you go. And what we do sometimes is we justify it to say, oh, but it's not that big of a deal. It was a small occasion. It wasn't like they were talking to a camper on Facebook, or it wasn't like they actually touched a camper inappropriate, so they don't need to be fired for that. That is where the inconsistency happens. And when inconsistency happens, that you decide to take your own desire of like, this is worse than this. If you put something within your policy manual, you have to hold them to that policy, right? So if your policy is like, you have a 3-strike rule for these categories, but these categories, 1 strike, you're automatically out, and that's fine. But your policy manual needs to reflect that, and you need to hold to that. The moment that you go away from what your policy manual says regarding your volunteers and management of volunteers, then the higher the chance that you have no foot to stand on, because they're going to see you as an inconsistent person, right? So allowing someone to come late into camp or leave early for when camp is not done is going to be an issue, because then it sets a precedent that other people are going to follow. Questions on culture setting, policy manuals. How many of you have a national volunteer policy manual that you've worked on or that you inherited at one point? I think almost everyone. Does anyone not have a policy manual right now? Good. How many? When was the last time you've updated your policy manual? You can go off mute. You put it in chat. When's the last time you've updated your policy manual? Just curious. (2020). Good job. Pretty regular. Yearly. Good. You also can go off mute. I love dialogues. 2 years ago, yearly. I'm seeing that these are yearly themes. And now I'm going to ask you then, if we're updating these policy manuals on a yearly basis, or if you're not, who's involved in that process? Who are your stakeholders that you're actually bringing into this? Is this just the camp director? Is this leadership? Is this the foundation that you're working with? Directors, leadership, directors. I'm going to give you guys some advice in this, is that I'm not sure if you all were ever in a cabin or not. One of the things that we did early on when we go into it, people don't like rules. People think rules are to be meant to be broken. And this is where the buy-in comes in. So when we're in a cabin and we're talking to brand new counselors, we say, don't give them a bunch of rules to follow. What you do, you take a large, big poster board. You say, all right, guys, let's come up with some standards that we want for our cabin. What do we think we should be doing in here, right? What do you think should happen? And they'll list off being nice to each other. You know, don't hit each other. Don't do these things. They will be, and I will guarantee you, probably stricter than you will be strict. The purpose of why we do this is buy-in, right? So when someone breaks that policy or someone breaks that rule that they have in that cabin, you say, hey, this came from you guys. This is what you guys thought we should be doing, right? And when we said this, you said this was the consequence. Right? Didn't we all agree on this? And they've bought into what the precedent and culture they did. Same thing goes in every level. Your policy manual should be directed at where people of all levels can review it, right? So people can have input. The problem is sometimes we're working with volunteers who've been there a long time. They think that their opinion is going to be better than any other opinions, but that can't be the case, right? So there has to be a way in which you are getting feedback from people and that people are able to review and contribute to what they're doing. Because once someone is able to have buy-in to something, like we've all know with their passion and their entitlement per se up to it, that is redirected into, then help make this better, right? And to say all opinions are welcome, but at the same time, this isn't unless it's a liability, safety, HR, someone's going to get sued situation, unless it's one of those and we don't have clear guidelines and it's a more of a cultural thing or a desire that we want to take, we're a democracy and we take people's opinions into account. But at the end of the day, this is how we make our decision. Does anyone right now buy into that or have people outside of leadership actually work on their policies?
Yeah, this is Lynn from Special Days. One of the things I really like that you started to introduce when you talked about the cabin norms is something our program leadership has done. Special Days has been around for about 100 years, and I've been involved for about 101. So I fit in that category of being around for a long time. And our program staff, because we have probably about 80% of our staff are former campers, and that's something we're super, super proud of, but it brings all the challenges we've kind of been talking about for the last 45 minutes. But one of the things our program staff did a number of years ago is our groups they're all together, but they're split up by ages into something called a village. And we have village work. And what we found is that we build upon that. So the littlest ones are very focused on friendship. And then we go to enthusiasm and we grow up towards leadership and service. And so what I see, the point of that is taking that culture and infusing it, not just in staff training, but literally throughout camps programming. So the little ones know what Special Days culture is. And then as they get older and they apply to be a staff in training, that's not new for them, right? What we do and how we do it and why we do it and all of that is something that they've experienced since they were little. So it's not a solution that you can incorporate overnight, but being able to see camp over 45-ish years, it's really amazing the transition now. It's much smoother for folks that are going from campers to staff people.
I appreciate that insight. I want to mention something that you said. You know, when we started our camp, one of the biggest things is that people thought that if you left a cabin from a counselor or you became the lead counselor, is that these powers, it was like you got more power, right? So you got more say. So your opinions mattered more. And the higher you went up in the ranks, the more power you got. So what we started to see is that people who were really opinionated were the ones who were buying in for those positions and seeking out those positions. And it didn't mean they were necessarily good for it. And then we see this in daily life within just work that we work with, right? People think that like, if you're an opinionated person, you must be a leader. That's not always the case. So how are you setting the culture? One of the things that we started to do is before camp even began, part of the first thing is like, what's your intention for this month? What is one thing that you personally want to get out of camp? And what is one thing that you want your campers to get out of it, right? Setting that mindset of like, let's have a goal and shoot for it. The other thing we did was start to ask the question of like, what does camp look like for you? Succession planning is a real thing. Talking about the future, talking about your desires, what you would like to be, is a real thing. And it doesn't matter, right? So if we took the power dynamics out of these roles, yes, I understand that someone has to make the final say. Totally get that. I'm not saying that we take that away, but I'm saying if we take out this, I'm telling you what to do, my opinion matters more than your opinion type of situation, and we're gonna say, what is you're good at and what do you want to do? When we started asking them what kind of roles they want, I was surprised by the number of responses that people had said, because I think for so long, people had never been asked what they want to do at camp. They just thought it's entry levels is going to be like a counselor and I work my way up. I need to work my way up to the top. That's what you do, right? So it's like, you got to work your way up. Well, it's not like that. It's saying we have a lot of different areas and all skill sets are welcome here. And it's not a power of working your way up the ladder. It's more of we are a ladder across. Our mission is for the campers. So what is your skill set? What can we offer? Does it fit into what we currently have? Could it fit in the next 5 years? And how do we move towards that direction? Being mindful of 5 minutes to our time to end. Other questions, comments, again, we could do this a whole day training on really on volunteerism and working with people who struggled. I hope that if you are not looking at your policy manuals, that you start to review them. If you're not looking at job descriptions, you start to review those. If you're not doing evaluations, think about what that might be. And I'm happy to share all of those documents. I do 5 different type of evaluations. I have an evaluation where my campers do them for themselves of how they felt camp went. An evaluation on how the counselors thought the camper did, an evaluation of the counselors of their overall experience, or all of our staff overall experience of camp, our unit leader or leadership of our counselors. And then I do evaluations on my camp director. Like, everyone has an evaluation done on them, and they also give evaluation back to the organization of everyone else. So if you are a counselor or if you are the camp director, you're still getting evaluated on both ends. I'm happy to share those things too, because I think what that does is open up the floodgates of like, what are we not hearing? And how do we do it? And we do those at camp, last day. I don't care if it's tired, you're not gonna remember this. You're not gonna, chances are you sending me an email and following up on something that happened at camp, not gonna happen. So I'm gonna make you, I want you to take time out of your day, fill these out evaluations, tell me about the kids, tell me about yourself, tell me their experience, and then take everyone's word at what it is and review it with your leadership team to make camp better. But any other questions or comments before we close today?
Thank you for your time.
I'm going to put my email in the chat. If you guys need any other resources or want to continue this conversation, I know that this topic is quite big. And then we didn't even breach the conversation of when is it time to actually let someone go. And that is definitely something that I've had a lot of experience in within my organization. And I'm happy to get some guidance on that too. All right, well, if there's no other questions or nothing else, you guys are free to take a little 30-minute siesta and see you back at the next session.
Daniel, thank you. That was fantastic.
Thank you.
Right, we could do this all day. Food for thought for next time. Guys.
Bye.
Good stuff.